Golden Murray Water would have liked to have held this session face-to-face. However, COVID restrictions meant that we're doing this session virtually. We do want everyone to be safe. My name is Chris Dalton, and it's my real pleasure to be the facilitator of the session today. In my day job, I'm the Corporate Secretary at Golden Murray Water. That means I'm the member of the executive leadership team responsible for governance, integrity, legal services and water use theft and compliance. I'm coming to you today very proudly from the town of Elmore in northern Victoria. The view from the window right in front of me is across to the Campaspe River, and the river today looks idyllic in the sunshine. I can see the river, I can see a long stretch of trees, and I can see cattle grazing on the other side of the field, so it's pretty idyllic here. I acknowledge the importance of the Campaspe River to the Dja Dja Wurrung and the Barappa Aboriginal communities. We respectfully acknowledge the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the traditional owners and custodians of the land and water on which all Australians rely. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present and future, as traditional owners and custodians of the land and water on which we rely and operate. I'd also like to acknowledge the wonderful work that's being done at the moment in the Goulburn Valley community, in particular by Goulburn Valley Health and other organisations such as Goulburn Valley Cares, who are doing such important and valuable work during the COVID-19 outbreak in the Goulburn Valley region. So a big thank you to everyone who's involved in helping us with the COVID-19 outbreak. A few housekeeping matters, which I'm sure you're used to if you've attended a few of these virtual events. Please keep your microphones on mute when you're not presenting or asking a question. This seminar will be recorded, so please turn off your video if you're not comfortable with being recorded. Today we will use the chat function to support some interaction during our question and answer sessions. If you do have a question, there's two alternatives. You can just type in the full question and your name and I'll ask it of the presenter. Alternatively, you can just put in your name and I'll then come to you in turn. You can take yourself off mute and ask your question. Very importantly, I will be keeping to time today. Your time is valuable and I want to get you out into that sunshine as soon as possible today. That may mean that I'm cutting off conversations, but please note that if you log a question in the chat function that we don't answer, we'll certainly answer it as part of the summary of this session that we distribute afterwards. Also keep in mind that as well as having some Q&A portions of each of the presentations, we do have a general Q&A session at the end, so hopefully we'll deal with any unanswered questions then. We also will be asking you at the end of this seminar to give us some pretty quick feedback, and that is, and I'll remind you at the end of today's session, that is rating out this session between 1 and 5 and just putting that in the chat function, but I'll remind you again at the end of the session. This feedback is really important. It's important full stop, but it's also important because we haven't run a session like this for a little while. And based on your feedback, we're thinking of factoring in a solicitors and brokers session as a regular part of what Golden Murray Water does with engagement. Now, I know that we're all working from home, so please don't feel stressed if a child or a pet or a tradie wanders into the background during this session. That's all fine. I think we've all been used to that over the last 18 months. I also want to give a warning to presenters, and that is I'm always looking for good recommendations of movies, something on TV or a streaming series that I can get into. So presenters, I will be asking you at the start of your presentation to give us a quick recommendation on something that you're watching or you've liked. And if you're a participant today, you can also put that in the chat function as well. My recommendations are I've really been enjoying, if you want to laugh, the Kaminsky Method on Netflix. And I've also been enjoying The Last Kingdom on Netflix as well, which is a bit of a serious historical drama about Anglo-Saxon England. So that's all the housekeeping. I'm now going to move to our first session, and it's great because we're already ahead of time. Our first session today is with Lisa Dudley, who's going to talk to us about working with Goulburn Murray Water's customer experience team. Now, Lisa grew up in the Goulburn Valley on a dairy farm, which makes her perfectly situated to understand our customers, and has been at Goulburn Murray Water for 14 years. Lisa has held a variety of roles. She's been the coordinator of water trading, business analyst, strategy and architecture coordinator, and importantly, she's been in the role of customer experience manager since October last year. Lisa has also supported DELP in the implementation of many process improvements, including the introduction of online allocation trading and bore construction licenses. So Lisa, I'll throw to you, and I'm going to throw to you with a question. Can you recommend something that you're enjoying watching at the moment?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I've been watching a series on Stan of late called Younger. So it's been something that has been my wind down of late.
Fantastic, and we all need that. Over to you, Lisa.
Thank you. Okay, so as Chris said, I'm just going to provide a bit of an update and an overview of the customer experience team. So first of all, get my slides working, sorry. Okay, so the customer experience team is made up of 3 teams. So I'm, as Chris said, the manager of that team. And we then have the Customer Contact Centre, which is led by Lou Kerrins, the coordinator, and they cover off on many different functions, incoming calls, incoming and outgoing mail, and our accounts receivable type inquiries and functions. We then also have the Land and Licensing team, which is led by Pam McGrath. So Pam and her team, they cover our groundwater and surface water licence applications, everything to do with delivery share and water use licences, so including the restructure of water services and works licences. And then we've also got the third team being the water trading and change of ownership team, which is led by Steph White, our coordinator in that team. And they cover all things water, so allocations, water shares, and then our change of ownership functions. So change of ownerships of regulated properties as well as unreg and groundwater services. Bit of an overview of what the team achieved in the last financial year. So some big numbers, nearly 40,000 calls made into the contact centre. Nearly 2,000 water share transfers completed, and 263 unreg and groundwater change of ownerships, just to highlight some of the achievements of the team. Some of these numbers are on par with other years. The allocation trade figure there is slightly lower than the 2019-20 season. Which is understandable because in that season we did have the water for fodder applications, which bumped that number up a bit. Water share transfers was slightly higher last financial year to the one before, but generally on par with the other transactions. We've recently issued our fixed charge accounts at Goulburn Murray Water, so there was a few changes on this year's accounts to other years. So the customer fee was introduced this year. So this and the water register entitlement fee were commitments under our water plan submission. So the customer fee replaces the service fee on customers' accounts. So previously some customers received multiple service fees on a single account from Goulburn Murray Water. So we have removed that now and replaced it with this new fee, which a customer will only receive once per account. The water register entitlement fee. So this is a fee that Goulburn Murray Water is charged from DELP. So we have made the decision to pass that fee on to our customers. based on the number of entitlement records that they have held in the Victorian Water Register. So this was previously covered by the service fee, regardless of the number of entitlements that a customer held. Some of our customers will also notice a change to the layout of their account this year. So we have introduced a consolidated account where customers have multiple services with GMW. They have the option to opt in or opt out of receiving their account in a consolidated account form rather than multiple individual accounts from Goulburn Water. Just some updates on water share applications. So just some common things that we're finding with these applications at the moment. So probably a reminder that because the accounts have just been issued, we do need the storage fees to be paid as part of any water share transfer application. So we are finding at the moment that we are having to put majority of our water share transfer applications with applicant to get that fee paid. So just a reminder that that can be paid prior to the application being submitted to GMW. And if you are unsure about how much that is, the vendor can contact us to confirm the amount that is required to be paid prior to submitting that application. Just another one that's been coming up of late is the requirement for signatures to be original hand-signed signatures. So we cannot accept electronic signatures of any kind on water share or allocation applications. They can be scanned versions, but the document has to be hand-signed prior to being scanned in and submitted to GMW. Another one that's come up is the water share identity checks. So just a reminder, which this was included in our December newsletter as well, that we will accept a verification of identity document where it is part of a Form 55 or a Form 1 that we can see relates to the change of land ownership application. So in other instances, we won't accept a VOI with a water share transfer. They are the only times. And just a reminder, if you ever are unsure, feel free to give us a call. It is more efficient for us, and if these applications come in correct the first time, it means we can get through them a bit quicker and get those answers back to yourselves in a more timely manner. So please feel free to give us a call if you're unsure about a question or a requirement of the form prior to submitting it to us. Just a couple of points around change of ownership applications. So just a reminder again that with information statements, it's only the original applicant that can request that rates and charges update. So we do from time to time receive those requests from other, might be from the buyer's solicitor. We're unable to action off that. It does need to come from the original applicant. And again, with the Form 93s, which are for the transfer of ownership of a groundwater or surface water unregulated licence, just a reminder to check that all the sellers and buyers have signed the form prior to submitting it to GMW. And lastly, with the restructure of water services, the Form 50, just a reminder that if there are multiple service points listed under one of the new holdings, we do need the delivery rate to be filled in on that section. Where there is only a single service point, that's fine, because obviously the whole delivery share will be apportioned to that service point. But where there are more than one, we do need that to be filled out by the customer to advise us what a portion they would like of that delivery share across the service points listed. And that's all I had. Thank you, Chris.
Thanks so much, Lisa. I know that when I'm dealing with Lisa at Goulburn Water, I always appreciate her solution-focused, customer-focused approach to everything she does. So Lisa is now, we're a little ahead of time, which is great. So We've got a few minutes for questions if anyone has a question. So we have a great question from Nina. I don't know if you're able to see that, Lisa. I can read it out if you can't.
Just having a quick read of that. Yeah, thanks for that, Nina. So because the rates and charges update needs to be sent back to the applicant, so it needs to be them requesting that. Understand where you're coming from, and it's definitely something I can take on notice and we can consider as a process improvement in the future. But yeah, as it stands at the moment, we do need the applicant to request that rates and charges update.
Were there any other questions for Lisa? Lisa, I've got a question for you. What's the trickiest issue that you're dealing with at the moment in customer land?
I think it's probably the ability for customers to obtain original signatures. So obviously we're trying to stay safe in the current environment. So we are receiving a lot of inquiries around yeah, the ability to do things online and electronically rather than physically signing things or physically having things witnessed. So it is something that we are working through in a few different avenues with DELP and the Water Register as well, because yeah, we do understand that that is a very challenging issue for our customers and our solicitors and brokers in this current environment.
And Lisa, how has Goulburn Murray Water been able to keep up with serving our customers during this period of COVID and a lot of staff working from home? Have we been able to keep up the pace?
Yeah, so we definitely have had some challenges and some teething issues at the start, but we've managed to adapt a lot of our processes to accommodate for our staff working from home, receiving a lot more applications electronically, which is great, and we thank you know, all our solicitors and brokers for that, because it does make our life a lot easier receiving them via electronic methods. But yeah, it has been a challenge to maintain and adapt our processes. We were very paper-based prior to having to begin working from home, but I think we've managed to get on top of those processes now and really seen some improvements, which will be great for the future as well.
Fantastic. Lisa, thanks so much for your time this morning, and thanks for the fantastic work you do for our customers.
Not a problem. Thank you, Chris.
We're now moving to our next session, and I'm delighted to introduce Joe Banks and Alex Murray, both from DELP, to discuss the Goulburn to Murray trade rule changes. So Joe has worked for DELP since 2007 on a range of reforms to provide water users with clear entitlements that give certainty about their share of water. Joe and his team lead the Goulburn to Murray trade review and the implementation of the interim Goulburn to Murray trade rules. Alex Murray is in that team and is the Senior Policy Officer, Retail Entitlements with DELP. The way this session is going to run is that Joe and Alex are going to give us a presentation for 25 minutes. We then have 15 minutes at the end for questions. So Alex and Joe, you may have missed the start of the session today, and that was asking each of our presenters to give us as they start their presentation, to give us a recommendation of something they're enjoying on TV, a movie or a streaming service, because we all need good recommendations. So I'll start with you, Joe, and then perhaps Alex, if you give us your recommendations, and then away with your presentation.
Thanks, Chris. God, you put me on the spot there. I haven't been watching enough quality TV. I've been watching a lot of Paralympics and being frustrated about how much commentary and how little athletics, I must say. So that's my rant for the day, and apologies, I don't have more cultural wisdom to impart.
Paralympics is fantastic. That's a big green tick. Alex, how about you?
Yeah, we've also been watching a lot of Paralympics, I've got to say, and Olympics before that. What else have I been? Yeah, you've really put me on the spot. We should have joined earlier, so we had a lot more to think about this.
That's okay. Paralympics was a good green tick for both of you, so you're sharing the glory of that. I'll now hand over for your presentation. We're looking forward to it.
No worries.
Thanks.
I'll start sharing my screen too, Chris, if that's...
While you do, Alex, I'll just say hello to everyone. And as Chris said, I'm going to actually let Alex do most of the presenting here because she's been doing a lot more work than me on Goulburn to Murray Trade Review. I'm not sure whether many of you will have met her before, but she'll talk through this stuff. While she's setting up, I'll just quickly mention a couple of other things. One thing I should let you know, and I'll send an email around this, that we've had a few changes within the team, and James Magoto, who many of you know, probably particularly the brokers, has been working with us for a while. He's actually moved on to another role, so he won't be within the team anymore. So we'll have some new contacts in the team, and I'll send an email around to that for people. But on that note, why don't I throw to Alex, and then yeah, I'll be here throughout, and we're happy to answer questions at the end.
Does everyone see that presentation okay? Fantastic.
Yes, we can. It's great.
I'm just going to start by doing a quick overview of what was announced on the 30th of June for the Goulburn to Murray Trade Rule Review. We heard through consultation, which we undertook pretty extensively in March and April and through to May this year. We had very mixed views, as expected, about the Goulburn to Murray Trade Rule and the operating rules for the Lower Goulburn. Obviously, it's pretty important for a lot of different stakeholder groups. Given the mixed views and some of the untriedness or untested of having operating rules on the Goulburn, the Acting Minister for Water announced that this year would be an interim year while we'll trial these rules and make sure that we're really getting it right. So first of all, we obviously have the interim operating rules for 21-22. So that sees similar volumes as last summer's kind of monthly volumes or targets that we had of releases of water from the Goulburn IVT, but in that more variable pattern that we know is better for the river. We also are looking at trialling 2 larger pulses of water in early summer and autumn, up to that 6,000 megalitres a day. Those larger pulses won't be affecting trade opportunity in this first trial year. It's really about getting some certainty around using those larger pulses if we can move those pumps into the future. There's a fair bit of work that will go into being able to trial those larger pulses, particularly in early December. So hopefully, conditions allow us to do that, which means we can have a little bit more certainty about using those pulses into the future. And hopefully for some trade opportunity. We also have monitoring funded on the Lower Goulburn, so that was very important for us and for the community to make sure that the operating rules are doing what we expect that they will do, and that monitoring is in partnership with traditional owners, scientists and environmental managers, and all those findings will be made public. Obviously, there's a little bit of a difference what we can learn over this first year and what we can learn long term. So at the moment, that's funded for 3 years, and hopefully, into the future when we continue monitoring the impacts. Our interim tagging arrangements will continue. So that's the restriction of tagged use over when allocation trade is restricted. So those interim arrangements actually expire at the end of November, so we will be looking to make a final decision on those arrangements before that time. The tagging exemption will continue for the Lower Broken Creek through 2021 and 22 while we consult more with the irrigators there. So I've got a bit of an echo, is that, yeah, that's better. So I just wanted to reiterate that there'll be no changes to the rules for Lower Broken Creek this year. We also have, of course, the interim trade rule, which I'll definitely focus on mostly through this presentation from the 1st of July 2021. So that interim trade rule is in place at the moment, obviously till the 30th of June next year. It was really important that we got the interim trade rule in this year because it really allows us, to test those operating rules as they're designed, as it gives river operators a bit more confidence about the trade opportunity that's been created. But it was obviously a really good year for us to get this trade rule in and for it to begin operating like it was designed, because we had a low IVT balance at the end of last season. So it was a really good opportunity that meant that we didn't have such a shock to irrigators and the market in terms of the volume of trade opportunity available. And then we're looking to make those rules long-term, or make a long-term decision about the rules before the 1st of July 2022, obviously before the next season starts. So we're looking, aiming for May, so that there's a bit more time for everyone to adjust and be prepared for those rules to come into play. So just very quickly what the operating rules, because obviously it gives context to our trade rule. So as you can see, it's the operating rule that we did consult on through the regulatory impact statement, where we have base flows of 1,100 megalitres a day in between 3 pulses of up to 3,000 megalitres a day. So those pulses in terms of the trade rule are up to 3,000 megalitres a day. So you can see that brown line there. The dotted brown line is those trial pulses that we're trying to see if we can trial some larger pulses in that early summer and autumn period. So that's more in line with when environmental water managers would use pulses. That midsummer pulse will stay at up to 3,000 megalitres a day. And the reason that is there's just a bit more uncertainty around those larger pulses in midsummer. So we're going back and doing a bit more risk assessment with the scientific panel about those ones. As mentioned, those higher pulses won't impact trade opportunity this year. So just very quickly on the Lower Broken Creek, the Lower Broken Creek will continue to be subject to the Goulburn to Murray allocation trade rule, but the exemption for tagged use restrictions will continue through 21-22. We're going back to the Lower Broken Creek with some options for managing trade between the Goulburn and the Lower Broken Creek and consulting more with the irrigators there. And then hopefully a decision on the rules for the Lower Broken Creek in early 2022. You'll see when I go through what this means in the trading rule engine and on the water register, that we do have to manage the tagged use in the Lower Broken Creek through the water register to make sure that it doesn't impact the trade opportunity for others as they do actually contribute to the IVT balance. So just a little context for when we get to the water register. Yeah, we do have to manage that to make sure we're not impacting others by having that exemption. So we talked a lot through the consultation for the regulatory impact statement about operating rules and trade rules. But then now that we're putting these rules in place, we talk a lot more about operating plan, or the operating plan for the Lower Goulburn. So I'll just run through what the difference in those things are, because yeah, the focus is really shifting now to what that means for river operations, which is more in the operating plan. So the operating rules are Victoria's rules that prescribe the flows in the Lower Goulburn. So they are those 1,100 megalitres a day in between those 3 pulses over summer and autumn. So they're our operating rules. And that gives us our 190 gigalitre IVT balance, because that's what we know we can deliver over that summer and autumn period. The trade rule obviously determines when trade is available from the Goulburn to the Murray, and is designed to provide more certainty through winter and spring, and bring the IVT balance down to 0 for the end of the season. So that's that 2-part trade rule, which I'll go into much more detail in a moment about how that works. The operating plan is our agreed plan, currently an aim-to plan, given that it's an interim year, with Murray Darling Basin river operators for year-round default delivery pattern of IVT. So not just summer and autumn, but from the 30th of June, so from the 1st of July to the 30th of June. So that ensures that IVT is delivered within the operating rules, but also without unnecessarily restricting trade. So we are planning to publicly release the operating plan through September as we start to have deliveries from the Goulburn IVT account from mid-September. And GMW will be releasing details of planned deliveries on their website each month, so that there's some certainty around what's happening over that month and what trade opportunity might be available. So we can see in that graph there that that's the default delivery plan as set out in the Goulburn operating plan from September through to June. And what that means is that we've got that real certainty that during that winter-spring period where deliveries create trade opportunity, that default delivery pattern that's agreed with the river operators means that that trade opportunity will be available each week in an average year. So there are obviously some reasons that we can vary from that default delivery pattern, but the operating plan really sets those out, so there's really clear triggers about why or why not deliveries are made. So that, as I said, will be published through September, hopefully in the next couple of weeks, and then we will start delivering from the Goulburn IVT account, and obviously with that trade opportunity created each week. So an overview looking a bit more deeply into how the Goulburn to Murray trade rule is working. So it's that two-part trade rule that we talked about during the consultation on the RIS. So during winter and spring, and up until the 15th of December, so starting when the deliveries start in September, it's a rolling limit, which works just like the old trade rule did. So when the balance drops below 190 gigalitres as water is delivered from the Goulburn IVT account, trade opportunity is created up to that 190 gigalitre limit again. From the 15th of December, net trade will be capped, and that enables us to bring that IVT balance down to zero for the end of the season. A good thing to note is that back trade will work exactly like it used to. The back trade rule has not changed. So after that 15th of December time when we announce the trade cap and all that trade opportunity is taken up, deliveries no longer create trade opportunity, but back trade will create trade opportunity like it has in the past. So there may be some trade opportunity being created over that period, but also noting that as we're bringing the IVT balance closer to zero for the end of each season, obviously the opportunity to trade from the Murray to the Goulburn is reduced towards the end of the season. So that's the only thing that changes about back trade is that as we draw down the IVT balance, obviously there will be less opportunity to back trade towards the end of each season. So that table just is a bit more of an in-depth look at how the trade rule works. So at the 1st of July, what we did was we set aside the IVT balance from last season. So the idea is that we might be able to use those larger freshers or testing those larger pulses to deliver that balance from last year. So that has gone into the trade rule for this year. What we also did, which is a little bit different, is we set aside the full seasonal allocation to those exchange rate legacy commitments. So what we used to do in the past, so there's about 100 gigalitres, just under 100 gigalitres of exchange rate trades that historically were traded from the Goulburn to the Murray before 2007. And what we used to do was, the way the trade rule used to work was that when we opened trade at the 1st of July, or when the 1st of July, when the new year started, we would put aside the amount of water that the seasonal determinations were at the time, and then as seasonal determinations went up, that volume went into the IVT balance. The problem with that is that it often would make the IVT balance go over that 200 gigalitre limit, and obviously we'd be in negative trade opportunity. So what we've done is the new trade rule is designed that we now say, okay, we're going to assume that we get to 100% seasonal allocations, so we're not creating more trade opportunity than is actually should actually be available. And then we reassess those seasonal determinations at the 15th of December when we announce that trade cap. The other thing that goes into the IVT balance at the 1st of July is that legacy commitment to the Snowy. So that's about 43 gigalitres this year. That is unchanged from the previous trade rules. So that always went into the IVT balance at the start of the season. So you can see there that that's a total of 142 gigalitres that is quarantined from trade at the 1st of July. So what that gives us is about 50 gigalitres of trade opportunity at the start of the season, which is what happened this year. So obviously that's 140 plus your 50 gives you that 190 balance. Through winter and spring, trade becomes available as river operators call out water. Or deferred deliveries. I'll get a little bit more detail about what deferred deliveries are, but basically river operators can set aside water to deliver later if those commitments have already been met in the Murray, or the demands have already been met in the Murray, I should say, from high flows in the Murray. And I'll get into what that means, but basically it's designed to give a bit more assurance that if river operators choose not to deliver water to basically optimise resources or Victoria's resources, it doesn't block trade opportunity. So we assume about 80 gigalitres of additional trade opportunity through that winter and spring period in an average year. So that's those default deliveries under the operating plan that I was talking about earlier. From the 15th of December, trade is capped. So a trade cap is announced on the 15th of December. What that is it's we go back and look at what the seasonal determinations are expected to be against those legacy commitments. If they're not expected to be 100%, some of that water can be released as trade opportunity. And then obviously any headroom left in that IVT balance under the 190 gigalitre limit. That is announced as the cap, and then once that trade opportunity is taken up, trade only becomes available through back trade. So deliveries after the 15th of December don't create additional trade opportunity. So that gives us about 130 gigalitres of trade opportunity in an average year. How that compares to previous years, obviously that is less than those extreme years of 17, 18, 18, 19, where trade was essentially, uncapped, and we were seeing trade up to 250 gigalitres. We know that we can't get trade opportunity up to those volumes and still manage the environmental impacts on the lower Goulburn. So we're not planning to have trade up to those volumes anymore because it just is not sustainable for the river. Obviously, if we can use some pulses, higher pulses, to create a bit more trade opportunity into the future, that volume may go up a little bit, that 130 gigalitres. It's pretty close to 1920, where we saw 150 gigalitres of net trade. And then obviously in all other years, it would actually meet that demand for trade. So, and then obviously at the end of last year, we saw a lot of trade back up into the Goulburn. So we actually saw net trade in the other direction. So just those new features in the trade rule that I mentioned as I was going through how the trade rule works. So first of all is that ability to set aside the IVT not delivered from last year. And again, that was really designed to be able to trial those larger pulses, so having some water there to use in those higher pulses, but also to support the transition to the new rule without restricting trade. So trying to have as minimal a disruption to the market as possible. The other one is those deferred deliveries. So basically that has been put into the trade rule to allow river operators the flexibility that they currently have to respond to spill risk in the Murray and also to make the most of Victoria's resources. So sometimes demands are met in the Murray by high flows. and river operators choose not to deliver because it might mean that Victoria's resources are spilling at Lake Victoria. But we assume that those demands, because they've made those choices, the demands downstream have already been met. So essentially, river operators can set aside that water and they can use it in an operational capacity throughout the season, but within the operating rules. So where there's headroom in the operating rules, they can deliver that water through the season. What it means is trade is created just as if that water was delivered, so it isn't unnecessarily restricting trade through winter and spring. And yet the river operators can use that water. Sometimes they use it may use it to boost Lake Victoria storages at the end of the season or flowing starting into the next season. So essentially, it's just really allowing the river operators that flexibility to optimise resources that they previously have had. This graph is just a very quick look at how that works. So the grey bars are your default IVT delivery. Those blue shaded sections in September and October are examples of when river operators might choose to defer deliveries. And the green bars in November, April and May are some headroom underneath the operating rules, which are those blue lines and those black lines, that mean that they can deliver that water under the headroom of the operating rules in other parts of the season. But that hasn't blocked that trade opportunity. So just very quickly, where all this information or how this will translate to changes on the water register. So there's a couple of places where you can see the components of the Goulburn IVT. So obviously in the Where Can I Trade tool, which you can get to from the home page of the water register, and by clicking on the arrows, which are your trade opportunity, and you can bring up the components of the trade rule. So you can see that graph there. Some of those components will change in the next few weeks as we're making sure that we're really just doing some rejigging to make that water register and those components more understandable. But essentially that gives you your trade opportunity or components of the trade rule that give you your trade opportunity. We can also see it from from the allocation trade page. There is a click here for data that leads to the limits above under your allocation trade opportunities, and that brings up a PDF that's updated every 15 minutes. So every 15 minutes, the tables in that PDF, the volumes in that PDF will change dependent on what's happening on the water register. And will give you your trade opportunity. So this is from a couple of days ago, and you can see the Goulburn to Murray trade limit trade opportunity is negative 1.3 gigalitres. So there are some reasons that we can still go into small negatives on the IVT balance, and that is a lot around those grandfathered tagged arrangements that do still exist and do mean that people holding those arrangements can still use tagged water when the allocation trade rule is closed. So so that's why you will still see some small negatives in the IVT balance. So a little bit of a closer look about how that works. So these are the components of the Goulburn IVT, and you can see that I've just done the Goulburn to Murray IVT limit there, and not all the other rows in those graphs. And this is obviously the forward trade rule, so from the Goulburn to the Murray. So you can see your trade volume limit is your new IVT limit, which is 190 gigalitres. The balance at the start of the season, so anything that is in a negative decreases that trade opportunity, so takes up volume in that IVT balance, and anything in green is creating trade opportunity. So you've got your negative 49 gigs there, and that is your snowy commitment, plus the balance that was rolled over from last season. So that's about 6 gigalitres from last year. We have the legacy reserve for entitlements historically traded out as exchange rate trades. So that's where we've quarantined 100% allocation against those exchange rate trades. So you've got almost 99 gigalitres there. The next row is your delivery from your Goulburn IVT account from the 1st of July to the 15th of December. Obviously, no deliveries have been made yet, so that's 0 at the moment. We only update that to the 15th of December now, and the reason is obviously because that trade cap comes into play. IVT delivery deferred. So at the moment, what is in that column is almost 6 gig. That is the balance brought forward from last season. And that appears in both the balance at the start of the season and the deferred deliveries, because we've set that aside. So we want that to have a neutral impact on the IVT balance at the moment. So that's been a credit back to the IVT balance, if that makes sense. But what you'll also see go in there is those deferred deliveries that river operators choose to make between the 1st of July and the 15th of December. So basically delivery from the Goulburn IVT account and those deferred deliveries will be where that trade opportunity is created through the season. You've got delivery from Upper Goulburn to Lower Broken Creek IVT account. So what we will begin to put into there from mid-September is any tagged use in the Lower Broken Creek as a credit to the IVT balance. And the reason that is because we don't want that tagged use to block trade opportunity for everyone else. For the tagged use in the Lower Broken Creek. So that will be a new component of the Goulburn IVT balance. Tagged use this season in the opposite direction, obviously that's 0. Tagged use this season in the direction of the limit, so you've got 1.3 gigalitres there tagged from the Goulburn to the Murray.
Alex, sorry to interrupt you. It's Chris here. This has been a great presentation so far. Really keen that we have some time for questions. So we've got about 10 minutes left. So
yeah, no worries. I'll just I can move on very quickly there. So I think the rest of that is very self-explanatory. This is really just saying the back trade opportunity has not changed. So you can see that the back trade components of the IVT will work just as they previously had. So that's really important to note. And then just where to from here in September, which is now, in the next couple of weeks, we'll be releasing that operating plan. And then we'll be beginning default deliveries from mid-September. So we'll be making sure that there's an announcement there so that everyone can know when to expect that trade opportunity to begin to become available. And that will happen on Wednesdays, just like it used to previously under the old trade rule. As I mentioned before November, we obviously have to make a final decision about those tagged use regulations because those interim regulations change. So certainly keep an eye out for that. But just very importantly, 15th of December is when that trade cap is announced. So that's what we really want to stress to customers, that there is that trade cap in place from the 15th of December. And then obviously we have our trials over summer and autumn and a long-term decision announced from around May next year. And they will be the rules that come into play for the 1st of July. So that's it from me in terms of the presentation. So yeah, very happy for any questions for Joe and I.
Alex, that was fantastic. Thank you so much. We are now entering into the question and answer session until 10 o'clock. We have our first question from Todd Oakley. Thanks, Todd. Will the opportunity for trade open at the same time as the cap is announced on the 15th of December?
Thanks, Chris. Do you want me to have a go, Alex?
Yes.
Good question, Todd. I think that's one we can have a bit of a think about. I think our initial thought was effectively, sorry, let me take a step back. That opportunity for trade and the trade cap will be updated with the resource manager's seasonal outlook on the 15th of December, which, like all the seasonal determinations, is released at 10 a.m. So what happens in practice effectively is the cap will be the trade opportunity that's there immediately before the announcement. plus any more if the outlook says we're not likely to get to 100%. I think we'd probably assume that we'd just plug that into the register trade opportunity at 10 a.m. with the announcement. We could also think about leaving it a couple of hours till 12. It doesn't matter too much as long as it's people know what's there as a result of the announcement and know when it's loaded. So good point, and maybe leave that one with us. And I think it'll be an important point to communicate with our upcoming communication about when that happens.
And just a reminder, if you do have any questions, please put your name into the chat function or the question into the chat function and we'll get to your question. Joe and Alex, I was wondering if you could comment on what do you think will be the most challenging part of this for Goulburn Murray water customers?
I think I'll have a go, Chris. I mean, I think there is, it's a bit of change. In some ways, the bits up until mid-December works much the same. One thing we're trying to do with this operating plan is have a bit more transparency about how trade opportunities created through that period. So I think that's manageable, but the key challenge with us is to get that information clear and public. I think from mid-December, the way the trade will work will look quite different than in past years. And the other thing that might be a little different is if the IVT balance is drawn down close to zero more often, you'll more frequently see limited back trade opportunity late in the season, which is the situation we saw a lot last year. So I think those two things will affect a bit the dynamics of when people will look to trade and when trade opportunity is there. So I think they'll be the key things for customers interacting directly with it, I think.
Fantastic. And Alex or Joe, would you be able to comment on any themes you heard in engagement that you undertook on the trade rule changes?
Yeah, I think a lot of what we heard, Chris, was people were really happy with the certainty that it creates. Obviously, they are still worried about opportunities to access trade, which it still doesn't take out the competitiveness of that trade. But we did also hear that people were, I think it takes a bit more planning, obviously, because that trade cap comes into play from the 15th of December. So people kind of understood that trade-off between having that certainty and having to bring the IVT balance down to zero versus, obviously not having that opportunity through summer and autumn to access trade like they had previously. So certainly mixed things. We obviously heard, particularly down in the Lower Murray, that people were really keen to see those in-channel irrigation pumps moved so that trade opportunity might be increased under those higher pulses. So that was obviously a concern that they would like to see that increase from that 130 to a bit higher. But yeah, generally in terms of how the trade rule is designed, bit of adjustment, but definitely some good support for the certainty that's there.
And Joe or Alex, is there anything more you wanted to say about tools and resources that are available there at the website? You gave us a little bit of a glimpse of them.
Yeah, I think, look, for mine, I'd encourage people to have a play around with that where can I trade tool. It does, beyond just the Goulburn to Murray trade rule, it has a, once you get used to it, it has a heap of useful features to understand both individual trade rules, but also situations if you're moving water from one zone to another and more than one rule might apply. So I think particularly just it allows you to see the limits that operate between different places, and that little pop-up Alex showed you of the components that make up the limit will give people a bit more of a feel for the key things that drive trade opportunity. So I think we've found in the past that a few people are aware of that and tend to interact with it with just a few of the rules, which are the main ones. But there is really a wealth of information, and if you're keen to understand more of the other situations that come up less often, particularly, for example, the Goulburn back trade constraint that came up late last year, we found that was a really helpful tool to help people understand what drove that. So, and we'll be, as Alex said, we're pretty keen to try and put together a bunch of, I guess, simple complementary information around that to help people navigate through it and explore it, etc.
Sounds fantastic, and that sounds like a really great resource. I'll just pause for a minute to see if there are any final comments or questions that attendees want to put up in the chat function. It sounds like we might be done. Sorry, no, we've got a great question from Liz Johnston. Can we go back to Backtrade and talk about how the volume will be displayed and how often it will be updated?
Do you want me to start?
Yeah,
Alex?
go for it.
Yep. So I think the Backtrade opportunity, Liz, you can see all the time through those live links on the register website in terms of the outcome. The key things that will drive it, particularly after 15th of December, are how much water is called out from the IVT account, because as it's delivered, it's no longer owed from the Goulburn to Murray, and that reduces the Backtrade opportunity. So that will continue to be done each week on a Wednesday, I think. And the other thing that takes it up, obviously, is when people trade water back up into the Goulburn, which can happen all the time. So, so certainly, you know, once a week as water's being called out, that will draw down the IVT balance and reduce the Backtrade opportunity, which you can see on those links. But then as people look to trade back up into the river, that will also reduce it every time a trade happens. So it is worth being aware of where to look for it. The other thing we obviously have is that is the app, which gives an opportunity to push notifications out to people. Many of you are probably aware as trade opportunities update. So I guess that's just a service which allows changes in those trade opportunities to be pushed to you rather than going and having to ask for it from the website.
Thanks very much, Joe. And thanks, Liz, for that fantastic question. I think we might be done. So this is my opportunity to thank you both again for your time this morning and sharing your expertise with us. Thank you so much.
Pleasure. Thanks.
No, thanks. Yeah. Thanks, Chris, and thanks, Alex, for presenting. And yeah, good to see all of you again. Appreciate it.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Bye.
Well, our next session this morning is dear to my heart. It's zero tolerance on water theft and compliance. So compliance and enforcement with water use is part of my responsibilities at Goulburn Murray Water. And I'm really delighted to be introducing Stuart Critchell, who's the Senior Manager of Water Recovery and Compliance at DELP. Stuart is part of the team that oversees and facilitates the Victorians' zero tolerance policy for unauthorised take of water. The team also verifies and supports significant water recovery projects. Prior to taking on this role in April this year, Stuart was the Senior Manager for Water Accounting and Reporting, which is a good background for compliance and enforcement, and has previously held statewide responsibilities for sustainable irrigation programs such as land and water management plans and salinity management. So Stuart, if you're here at the start, you know the question I'm going to ask, and that is, can you give us a good recommendation for something to watch?
Okay, I must confess I don't watch a lot of telly. I'm an avid Carlton supporter, so if you asked me that question a few weeks ago, Chris, I would have advised everyone not to watch the football, not to watch Carlton because it's soul destroying. But I did happen to a show on ABC a couple of weekends ago. I switched on the telly, and the lady who acts as Mrs. Sprout in those Harry Potter movies.
Oh yes,
Miriam. Yeah, so she's made Australia her home, and she was driving around Australia in a camper van and interviewing people, meeting people from all different backgrounds to ask them what the Australian dream meant for them. So I found that interesting, and I happened on a documentary on YouTube on Jacqueline Deprue, who was a famous celloist, apparently extraordinarily talented. I'm not a musician, but apparently she was extraordinarily talented, but had to stop playing at the age of 28 due to MS. And then she died at a young age, but I found that show interesting. So there's a couple of recommendations there for you, Chris.
Both good recommendations. Now, a couple of reminders. One is that we will be circulating around a summary of all of these sessions to everyone who's registered. So in particular, there was a lot of detail in that last section on the Goulburn to Murray trade rule changes. So as I said, we will be circulating around something in writing to everyone who's attending. And our session with Stuart now is broken up into a 20-minute presentation, and then we'll have 10 minutes for questions and answers at the end. And again, if you can put those in the chat function, that would be fantastic. So over to you, Stuart, and thanks so much for your time.
No, you're welcome. I've practiced this, so I'm going to see if I can share properly. Can you see the presentation?
We can, Stuart. I don't know if you want to
put in the slideshow.
Yeah, fantastic.
Okay.
Although it is showing us the next slide at the moment, but that's not a deal breaker.
Okay. I don't know how to move it from one screen to the other. So
that's fine. I
apologise for that. Anyway, I've tried to keep the slides brief, so hopefully you can read them. So anyway, thanks for the opportunity to come along today, Chris. Appreciate the invite. So just firstly, what we mean by unauthorised take or water theft, we mean when an allocation account goes into negative balance, or a customer, a landholder, continues to take water when their account is in a negative balance. The other point I'd like to make is if a customer holds multiple allocation accounts, they might have plenty of water in, say, the other account, but negative balance in the other account. Even though if you add them together, they might add up to positive, it's still unauthorised take. Their account is in negative, and that's their responsibility. The Victorian government does not tolerate unauthorised take. It's a strong policy response to some significant public concerns, well-documented concerns about people taking water without authority. And in particular, it's seen as being unfair to the vast majority who do the right thing. And also, particularly in Northern Victoria, it impacts the integrity of the water market when people are sort of taking water, then waiting to purchase water when the prices come down. Again, that's unfair for the people who are doing the right thing. So GMW, and I've added in Lower Murray Water here. Whilst we're talking to Northern Victoria, I forgot to emphasise that it is a statewide policy, and GMW and Lower Murray Water are implementing the zero tolerance policy in Northern Victoria with the support of DELP. The other point on this slide I just want to emphasise is about behavioural change. It may have been acceptable practice in the past, but it's no longer acceptable for users to wantonly go into a negative balance with the intention of squaring off their account at year end. It's their responsibility to make sure their account doesn't go below zero. So the government's done a few things to support the ability to implement a zero tolerance approach. Firstly, they've strengthened the Water Act. So new regulations came into play on the 1st of July 2020, which enables the water corporations to issue penalty infringement notices for account holders who have a negative balance of less than 10 megs. And the penalty varies depending on the extent of their unauthorised take, but the maximum that can be fined is a bit over two grand for individuals and nearly 11,000 for corporations. And if fined, that doesn't excuse the customer for the negative balance. They still have to make that balance good. So the Water Corps will start issuing penalty infringement notices from the 1st of January 2022. The other thing that's changed in the Act is the penalties for the more serious offences taken to court. And those offences, and I put down here for unauthorised take greater than 10 megs. I'll talk about that a little bit more. But more serious offences, like the fine can be up to $990,000 and it can be jailable. There has been a number of well publicised court cases recently where offenders have had to pay some would say, significant fines for their unauthorised take. The other point I should add there is that if a customer has stolen water by affecting the works of the authority, might have gone in and tampered a meter to try and take water undetected, GMW can and will take the customer to court, and I think there's been a few recently, Chris, where they've been it's been well publicised, where customers have been charged and found guilty.
Yes, there certainly has been, both for us, both for Golden Murray Water and for Lower Murray Water. And I notice we've got Nadia Sharif from Lower Murray Water with us, so g'day, Nadia.
Thanks. So, point I would also like to make is, the water corporations aren't sort of sitting there waiting on the phone. As soon as someone goes negative, you're going to get a PIN the next day. There is a tiered escalation policy, and this diagram here is sort of at a principal level, which will inform how water corps escalate this unauthorised take. But a couple of points I want to emphasise is the preference is to encourage and assist with compliance. Prevention is much better than the cure. And then there'll be, if a person is in negative balance, there will be, things like notices, warning letters, and then tier up, and eventually, if there's non-compliance, they get fined. However, the extent of the escalation will be based on circumstances. For example, if a customer is a repeat offender, we'll take that into consideration. If the water is really expensive and they're trying to avoid entering the market, just waiting for prices to come down, they'll take that into consideration. And also the impact the unauthorised take might have on neighbours due to times of low availability of water. They'll take those sort of things into consideration as well. But over time, penalty infringement notices will be a business as usual activity of the Water Corporation. So I think that water brokers are in a good position to support their clients in this policy. I think brokers should be aware that if the client may need to secure water quickly because they've got a negative balance, and they might, wanting to do the right thing and wanting to avoid being fined. I'd like to re-emphasise the point again that your client is in unauthorised use, even if just one of their accounts is negatives and the others are in positive. So things like securing cheaper, for example, 1A water to trade into the Murray, into a Murray account when trade opportunities become available, and worrying about making good that negative balance, then that's no longer acceptable. The customer is still an unauthorised take, even though they've bought water with intention of making that negative balance good when the opportunity arises. GMW and Lower Murray Water will be resolute in enforcing zero tolerance, and it is the account holder's responsibility to ensure that they keep their accounts in positive. It's not the Water Corporation's responsibility, it's the individual's responsibility. And I think it's in the landholder's best interest to plan early to ensure that they have sufficient water throughout the season, and brokers may have a role in supporting their client on this. Galloping through here, Chris, save you a bit of time. So next steps, Chris they've saved this presentation so you can look at it again at your leisure, but we will provide you a summary of the presentation and send out a one-pager on the sort of key points after this meeting. We will keep you advised on the progress with implementing zero tolerance policy, and I think it'd also be great if we could touch base with you guys later on this irrigation season, just to understand your experiences with customers wanting to deal with their account balances. And there's a couple of links for more information on this policy.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Stuart. If you want to stop sharing screen now, we might move into the Q&A part of our conversation. And I'd like to welcome Vanessa Guiney to this question and answer session. Vanessa is the Manager of Legal Services at Golden Murray Water. She'll be familiar to many of you in the Golden Valley community. She's fantastic. She does a really great job of providing legal advice to Golden Murray Water, and also has a role in compliance and enforcement as well. She's responsible, as I said, for the legal unit, overseeing compliance and enforcement, and coordinating energy and water ombudsman complaints and freedom of information applications. And I know from personal experience that she's a very busy lady, so we're so pleased that you're able to give us some of your time this morning, Vanessa. So I do encourage you that if you do have any questions about compliance and enforcement, again, to put the question into the chat function or your name into the chat function, and we'll come to you. But I might start out by asking you, Stuart, are you able to say anything generally about the performance of Victorian water corporations or water customers with compliance and enforcement generally with water use over the last couple of years?
Yes, thanks for the question. There's been a very strong downward trend in non-compliance over the last 3 years, and a flattening of that non-compliance during the peak irrigation period. So that's been really good. The water corporations, in my opinion, have been very proactive and very generous in adopting this policy and in working with each other cooperatively, and in supporting to help with the implementation of this policy. And I'd also like to mention too that Lower Murray Water and GMW, they share a trading zone, Zone 7, which is my understanding probably the most active zone for water trading in Australia, possibly the world. And Vanessa and Nadia have been working closely together towards a consistent approach in non-compliance between both water corporations, because there's, essentially talking the same customer base. Also, I think Victoria, from what I've seen, is leading Australia in non-compliance. We have the most metering of any jurisdiction in the country, and we have the most sophisticated register and system of tracking unauthorised take, and being very proactive in enforcement.
That's great, Stuart. And Stuart, are you able to talk about what's coming up as far as kind of statewide initiatives go with compliance and enforcement?
So the big one coming up, of course, is the penalty infringement notices and the implementation of that part of the Water Act. So that's something that the public will see over the next little while. The other thing we're looking at is we are assessing metering action plans, looking at how metering can be more frequent in some areas, and possibly the adoption of more telemetered meters if the cost and benefits warrant the investment. Those are two things that come to my mind. There's a lot of stuff behind the scenes that the community won't see, like the reporting that goes up to the minister. The minister for the brokers is actually advised each quarter on the extent of non-compliance across all water corporations across the state. That will continue.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Stuart. Now, I understand that Vanessa's been having some connection problems, so I'm going to do a bit of a test here to see if we can communicate with Vanessa. Vanessa, are you? Would you like to say something so we can see if the connection's working well?
Hi, Chris.
Fantastic. It sounds like the connection is working. Vanessa, I was wondering if you wanted to say anything about Golden Murray Water's performance in compliance and enforcement last financial year, so the financial year just passed, and what are some of the things that we think are important at Golden Murray Water and that we're trying to do?
Yeah, not a problem. Thanks, Chris. Sorry, I am getting a little bit of feedback. So our performance, I think, overall in compliance and enforcement last year was very good. We took a number of non-compliant customers to court. So I think in the end we prosecuted 19 customers. That was for unauthorised take and also for interference with works. We did issue a number of warning letters and caution letters, but I think all in all we're working well with our customers to ensure that they are compliant with the Water Act. In terms of big things moving forward for the next 12 months, as Stuart said, it's obviously the implementation of the penalty infringement notices, and we do have that 6-month period where we are working with customers to inform them that we will be issuing penalty infringement notices from 1 January 2022.
Fantastic, Vanessa. Are you able to say something at a high level about how penalty infringement notices will work?
Yeah, so as Stuart said, penalty infringement notices have been brought in with the stronger reforms to the Water Act. So at a high level, how they will work is we can issue them for unauthorised take pretty much up to 10 megalitres. So if a customer is anywhere, it works on a sliding scale, so from 1 meg up to 10 megalitres in with a negative ABA balance, then we will be looking at those as an option. So we will work with customers, so we will write to them or ring them first and say your account's negative, and then we'll look at that tiered escalation pathway as Stuart spoke to, as to what's the appropriate. If it's a repeat offender, we might go straight to penalty infringement notice, but it just is based on what our decision tree looks like and what the context is of the offending. So there's a range of factors we'll take into account, but we will be issuing penalty infringement notices from the 1st of January next year if needed. Hopefully we won't need them.
Fantastic, Vanessa. And as Vanessa was saying earlier, Golden Murray Water did a number of prosecutions last financial year, approximately about 20. And so there was a steady stream of matters going to the courts and being dealt with. Vanessa, is there anything that you wanted to comment on, given that we've got solicitors with us this morning as attendees, anything about at a high level of experiences working with the courts in these matters and the prosecutions that we undertook last year?
No, I'm not sure that there is, Chris, actually. Obviously, with COVID, we were appearing via WebEx, so that had its challenges in itself, as all technology does. But in terms of just working with solicitors, no, our engagement with solicitors in prosecution matters has always been very respectable and very professional, so no issues there.
All right, I'm just going to see if we have any questions or comments. Fantastic. So I've got a question from Karen Baker. How will this impact on stock and domestic supply users who might go over their allocation on a deemed usage in years where there is not a full allocation? So, a really good question. Did either of you, Vanessa or Stuart, want to deal to that?
I can have a go, Chris. Correct me if I'm wrong here, Vanessa. So PINs, the implementation of PINs is the Water Corporation's responsibility. They're the ones who will impose PINs. But I would think it unlikely that where a customer has taken water that's not been metered, has been deemed, and due to low allocations, and there might be, fractionally of a megalitre in a negative balance, that's not something I think we would be wanting to pin in the first instance.
Vanessa, did you have a comment on that?
That's correct, Stuart. GMW is reviewing their deeming policy and Chris is responsible for that action at the moment. But customers that go over their allocation in a deemed usage year, we will be working with them and speaking to them to work out how we will deal with that moving forward. But Chris is responsible for reviewing our deeming policy. Chris, I'm not sure whether you wanted to add anything there.
I just want to agree with what Stuart said, which is that, and sorry, for those of you who are not familiar with what deeming is, and that is there are certain Gold Murray water customers. They generally have a low water volume usage, so stock and domestic, where there isn't a meter, and the way that Gold Murray water works out how much water customers have used is by a process of deeming. So deeming is where we did an exercise some years ago now, where we just created profiles for different customer types based on some pretty specific calculation, and on that basis, kind of connected with properties what we believed that the customer would use in any given year. And certainly that process is always open to review with individual customers if they feel that they're not being deemed correctly. But to get back to your very excellent question, Karen, the bottom line is that we would be very unlikely to prosecute someone in the situation that you're describing with deeming. We always want to understand what the individual situation is of the customer, and certainly deeming is something that we would very much take into account and want to understand with the customer if the actual usage was different from what we had deemed. Were there any other comments or questions while I've got Stuart and Vanessa with me, the brains trust of compliance and enforcement? No more questions? Well, I think what we might do is we've now got a break that originally was to be 10 minutes. I say we give ourselves an extra 5 minutes to get that cup of tea. So we will be starting back at 10:40 on the dot with Fabian McCloy from Gold Murray Water. Stuart, I want to thank you very much for your attendance today and for your contribution. And Vanessa, I want to thank you for the input that you provided. So we're on break now until 10:40 when we come back to hear about irrigator share distribution. Thank you. Well, welcome back everyone. I hope you had the chance to take a little walk outside or get a cup of tea. I'm really excited about our next session, which is about the Irrigator Share Distribution Project. And I'm really excited to have Fabian McCloy from Golden Murray Water with us. Fabian has worked in the water industry for 18 years with roles in both rural and urban water supply. Most recently, he's worked as the Manager of Customer Relations and Customer Experience, and is currently working full-time on the delivery of the Irrigator Share Distribution Project for the benefit of all Golden Murray Water customers. Now, Fabian, I don't know if you were with us earlier, but I am asking each presenter to give us a viewing recommendation, something from TV or a streaming service or a movie. So what's something that you've enjoyed recently?
Something I've enjoyed recently, well, one of my favourite films, and I've revisited, is Last of the Mohicans of Daniel Day-Lewis. So for me, there's one particular scene where the music sort of this big crescendo of the music, and he's running towards the end of the film. It's just brilliant. One of my all-time faves.
Fantastic, another good recommendation. Now, just a couple of things before Fabian starts his presentation. One is Fabian will be speaking to us for 15 minutes, and then we will have a 10-minute Q&A session at the end. Fabian, we already have one great question from Liz Johnston, and we might come to that at the start of the Q&A session. So I'll hand over to you now, and really looking forward to hearing what you've got to say.
Thank you, Chris. Good morning, everyone. I'll just attempt to share my screen. Okay.
That's great. We can see that, Fabian.
Okay, thank you. So just a bit of a background to the Irrigators Share Distribution, or the ISD project as we call it internally. It's a culmination of a lot of work, obviously, and following the successful completion of the Connections project, there's $300 million worth of benefits that are actually being distributed back to eligible GMID customers, and we're on track to have that done in October. So some more history. The Minister set up an Irrigator Share Consultative Committee, and that was back in June 2019. And that was to effectively come up with some recommendations about how the irrigator share should be distributed. And the irrigators share, as I said, is water recovery through the Connections project, and was always touted to come back to Golden Murray Water customers as part of the stage 1 savings. So most people will probably remember that there was 225 gigalitres in stage 1, and at the time 75 GL was touted to go back to Golden Murray Water customers. So the Irrigator Share Consultative Committee recommendation was that the Irrigator Share should be distributed as a once-off distribution, and also distribute in proportion to the volume of delivery share held by the owners of a delivery share, and customers who actually pay the infrastructure access fee, which is obviously the delivery share fee, which is tied to land. So after all of the work that's gone on with modernisation, the GMW Connections project has delivered works to achieve 429 gigalitres of water recovery, and that is long-term average annual yield. And the total volume of the irrigator share will now be 77 gigalitres due to some over-recovery, which is good news. So who gets what? So customers with 0.25 megalitres a day or more of delivery share will receive water shares in October very soon, and customers with less than 0.25 megalitres a day of delivery share will receive a credit on their GMW fixed charges bill in July next year. And, you know, that really came about by the amount of water customers will receive. The decision was made, you know, for customers with less than 0.25, they wouldn't, you know, many wouldn't even get 1 megalitre, 1 high reliability water share. So that's why the decision was made to have an above and below threshold amount of delivery share. So yeah, a few key questions that I'll just go through in the next couple of slides. So broadly speaking, how many water shares? So for every 1 megalitre a day of delivery share, eligible irrigators can expect to receive water shares, or the financial value of around 4 megalitres of high reliability water shares and around 2 of low. So a census date, which you'll all no doubt be aware of, has been set for the 1st of October. And we've set that as close as feasible to the date when the water shares can be issued. So obviously for customers, and we've been communicating this throughout the year, as always, you know, trading or terminating delivery share is always important when considering, you know, your options within the GMID, and particularly when buying and selling land in the GMID, but especially moving towards a census date, you know, when there is such a value associated with the water shares that are being distributed. So we've also been communicating for customers to check their records. GMW has been doing a lot of work in the background where there are discrepancies within the system. So a lot of that work is being done on behalf of customers, and we're contacting customers to get their records up to date as well. Also had a lot of records, a lot of customers call and inquire as to their records being up to date. So effectively, we need the records for delivery shareholders in the Victorian Water Register to be exactly the same as landowners recorded in the title system. It's also been communicating for customers to consider their options. So they may wish to combine their delivery shares. They may have, if it's possible, you know, they may be able to combine delivery shares to get above the threshold and receive water shares. But, you know, really a key message has been for customers to contact GMW about anything at all regarding the project, you know, and of course to update billing addresses, to discuss their delivery share entity, land ownership, allocations accounts, and anything at all really. The message has been to get in touch with GMW. We did send out a customer guide earlier in the year as well, which covered off a lot of this communication, and it's been received fairly well. And you know, comparatively speaking, we haven't had a huge influx of customers calling unsure about what's going on. So take that as hopefully the guide's done its job pretty well. Just a quick side note, syndicates, there aren't many above the threshold of 0.25, but a decision has been made that all syndicates will receive a financial benefit on their credit rather than sharing water entitlements with multiple landowners that may not want to share a water entitlement together, may not even know one another, just very complex, some of the syndicate arrangements. So a blanket approach has been taken where, yeah, all syndicates will receive financial distribution. Just a quick one for, you know, around customers in debt. There's certainly been some talk from customers around about, you know, other customers, you know, who haven't been paying their bills and you know, they're still receiving the ISD, and you know, that is the case. We certainly do have a number of customers who have fallen outside of our normal debt recovery processes, but GMW's actually working, got a program of work put together where we'll be contacting all those customers and talking about their options in regards to the irrigator share and using the benefit to hopefully draw down on some of their debt or restructure their properties if that's something they need to do. Have a closer look at the amount of delivery share they own. You know, can they use the water shares to actually assist, you know, in the termination of some of that? Maybe an option for some customers, or selling the water shares to assist, you know, bring that debt level down as well. Ultimately, though, that'll be a decision that the customers will make, but we're certainly working proactively in that space as well. The other key thing I just wanted to talk about, and this will be of interest to a lot of our brokers and certainly our customers who are below the threshold. So we've developed a water trading strategy. We've had external consultants come in and work with the department and GMW, and really done some thorough market analysis and looked at, you know, the best way for GMW to sell the collective water shares for all of the customers under 0.25. So the financial distribution will be funded by the sale of the water shares across all of those customers. So obviously, you know, just a high level timeline here. We have the census date, and then mid-October we've got the issue of the water shares and allocations that'll commence. And by the end of October that will be completed, and then straight away we will get into the commencement of the sales, which the water trading strategy, you know, gives us an outline of how we'll go ahead and do that. So following that, there will be a publication of the final water savings audit in December. We'll continue selling the water shares and allocation through January right through to April, and that will enable us to have enough time to then ensure that all of the finances from the water sales can actually go onto the customer accounts in July next year. Some of the principles around the water trading strategy, you know, obviously we need to sell the entitlements and allocations in a timely manner. We've got, you know, the timelines of the project to consider and make sure that the entitlements can all be sold and everything be applied to the customer accounts next year. Obviously minimising potential market disruption and distortion. Definitely provide accountability and transparency for the water shares that are to be sold, and, you know, importantly, provide some opportunities for all interested parties to access the actual water that's going onto the market. So what happens next? Water shares are scheduled to be issued over that 2-week period in October, so from the 16th through to the 31st. There's a readiness for service independent assurance review which is happening prior to that, and that's an independent look at the whole governance and the structure of the project and all the moving bits and pieces to make sure that we're in fact ready to deliver the distribution. And as I said, that's being undertaken by an external third party. So any questions? I will just...
Fabian, thank you so much for that presentation. Do you want to stop sharing your screen now and encourage people to put questions or their name into the chat function? We already have 2 great questions which I'll put to you, Fabian. So the first one came from Liz Johnston a little earlier in our session today, and she was asking, given that the deadline is 1st of October, is there a deadline for lodging the forms with Golden Murray Water to make sure that they'll be processed?
Yes, great question, Liz. Yeah, so GMW will be working really hard to make sure we get everything processed prior to the census date. So our business as usual teams have got all their other work on top of, you know, a fair bit more work coming in from customers that are trying to get their records up to date. So we're working towards 10 business days. So that takes us to about the 17th of September. Having said that, we will certainly be doing everything we can to make sure as close as possible to census date we get everything done. So there's a huge focus on it, but you know, our standard KPIs are definitely puts us around the 17th, so we can comfortably put that date out there. But having said that, we will be working to get as much done as possible. And and another important note is that the bulk distribution is happening and the census date locks that in. But certainly, customers whose records aren't up to date don't miss out on the distribution. We will still be working through all of those records and working with all of those customers to get their records up to date so they can get the water shares. It just won't happen as part of the bulk distribution in October. They will actually be manually transacted.
Fantastic. And Liz Johnston, please let us know in the chat function if that hasn't answered your question. I've then got 2 or 3 more questions. So one is a great one from Ben Williams. Given the move towards treaty in Victoria, is there any intention to provide some of the savings in round 2 to native title holders in the relevant areas?
Look, at this stage, the water recovery was always touted to go back to GMW customers, and I know the department's been working with traditional owners around those communications. But from my perspective and my understanding, the 77GL is certainly from stage 1, and this is what I'm managing as part of the ISD project is to GMW customers.
Another question from Ben, which is, will the new entitlements be added to a new WE or an existing WE for the client?
They're new water entitlements, so new WEs.
Fantastic. We also have one from Karen Baker. How soon after census date can property settlement occur without impacting on the issue to the original landowner? So the property settlements will continue on, but the census date is the snapshot. So who owns the property at census date will be who receives the water shares. So it won't impact in that sense because the snapshot is taken of the register on the 1st of October, and they are the customers who will receive. Thanks, Fabian. And please, Ben and Karen, let us know if we haven't answered the question or if you'd like to ask a follow-up. While we just see if there are any more questions, I was going to ask Fabian, what has been the response from customers? This is such a great good news story for customers. It's not often you get something for nothing. So has there been a real sense of, kind of euphoria around it? I mean, it's great for customers who are often doing it tough with water in difficult years.
Yeah, look, Chris, it's been nice to be part of a project, and I certainly spent about 5 years in the Connections project in the Central Goulburn operations, and there were some really tough times with some of those customers, and the modernisation, great outcomes, but some very difficult years for the project as well. So for it to come full circle and the water savings being achieved, it's been really good. Most customers are very positive about it, and it is a good news story.
And it sounds like there's been some real secondary benefits there with the cleansing up of our customer data as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a lot of work done there. So yeah, certainly the systems are in a lot better shape than they were when we started earlier in the year.
Liz Johnston has got another good question. So she says, thanks for the answer, Fabian. One more question is about sale purchase of land and Golden Murray water updating details. Is the 17th of September the same date for those applications?
Yeah, well, the change of ownership, Liz, is 10 business days as well. However, certainly working very close with Steph White and Lisa Dudley around, as I said, you know, having everything as up to date as humanly possible before the census date. So, you know, like whereas I default to the KPI saying around the 17th, we'll certainly be doing everything we can to have it as up to date as possible. And you know, we will certainly be grabbing a snapshot of any in-flight kind of transactions that are going on from, you know, over that last day or so that, you know, are in flight. So, and we've got some opportunities to work within the systems to make sure that that, you know, the customers on census date will be the ones that receive the water shares.
Fantastic. I'll just wait a moment to see if there's any last questions or comments.
I guess, yeah, it has the brokers and solicitors out there had many questions coming in from customers. Certainly, like I said, we've had probably a few hundred customer calls come in and a couple of formal inquiries, but you know, in the scheme of things, that's probably not a lot over the year so far. So I'm hoping the ISD guide has done its job out there, but yeah, I'm certainly happy to and contactable if customers have got any other questions coming through you. So happy for you to contact me directly.
And Fabian, are there some resources at the Goulburn Water website?
Yeah, certainly are, Chris. There's lots of resources under our projects. You'll see the ISD project and there's plenty of information on there, including the customer guide electronically if people still haven't got it or would like to have it electronically.
Fantastic. Well, I think we'll leave it there, Fabian. Thanks so much for your time and your presentation this morning. And this is such a really exciting project, both for Goulburn Water and for our customers. So thank you once again.
Thank you.
And it's now with great delight that I introduce Mark Bailey, who's going to give us a seasonal update. And this session, it will be 10 minutes of presentation and then 10 minutes of questions and answers. So by all means, if you want to put a question, just put it in the chat function. Dr. Mark Bailey is very well known, I think, around the community. He's the manager of water resources within Goulburn Water. He leads the team responsible for managing surface water and groundwater operations across much of Northern Victoria. He's the delegated resource manager for Northern Victoria surface water systems. And importantly, he's the person who announces the seasonal determinations that allocate water to Victorian entitlement holders. His background is he is a civil engineer and has a PhD in catchment hydrology. Mark is also the star of episode 1 of Goulburn Water's Talking Water podcast, which can be found at the Goulburn Water website. In that episode, Mark talks about water management and allocations. Now, I'm sure many of you have probably heard Mark before, and you probably, like me, you sometimes wonder how all that knowledge can fit into a brain that could fit into Mark's head, but it does apparently, because he just has an endless amount of expertise and knowledge that we're so grateful to benefit from, both Goulburn Water and our community. Mark, you haven't been here a bit earlier, but each of the presenters I've been asking for a recommendation, either a TV show, a streaming show, or a movie that you've watched recently that you think people might enjoy.
Oh, okay, you've thrown me, Chris. Haven't been watching much TV lately. I have been watching War of the Worlds, which has just resumed on SBS. A very different take on a classic novel. So one that I quite enjoy. It scares the hell out of you at the same time. So that's one I would recommend.
Fantastic. Another good recommendation, and I like a good scare. So over to you, Mark, and if you want to share your screen, and as I said, it will be 10 minutes of presentation, 10 minutes of Q&A, And by all means, please put questions up in the chat function so we're ready to go when we come to that point. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you for that introduction. And I wasn't aware that some of those words were actually going to be spoken, so you've thrown me a little bit this morning, which I must say, everyone, Chris has a habit of doing with his quirky sense of humour. Thank you, everyone, for the opportunity to present this morning. So hopefully, can I just get a thumbs up if everybody can see the screen?
We can see it, Mark. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you very much. Just always want to make sure that I've got the screen in front of me before I start off talking, and nobody can actually see what I'm talking about, and instead watching me and that head of mine. Again, thanks everyone. You'll notice this morning I am presenting in not a Goulburn Murray Water format. I'm using the Northern Victorian Resource Manager site, mainly because this is part of the work that GMW does on behalf of numerous water corporations across Northern Victoria and numerous water users. So because we're representing interests as far away as the other side of the Sunraysia region towards South Australia, I use the NVRM, what's the word I want to use, template for this one. So this morning I'll cover the current resource availability, including this morning's announcements, just a quick chat about what the catchment conditions are like, and particularly with some of the drier weather and warmer weather we've been seeing. Talk about the seasonal outlooks, just about where they're at, and a quick wrap up. As I say, as Chris has just mentioned, it's only a short presentation this morning and an opportunity for questions. So this morning we announced some modest improvements to the seasonal determinations across Northern Victoria. The Murray is now at 57%, the Goulburn has reached 71%, pretty much symptomatic of the relatively dry conditions that we've seen for the last couple of weeks. Elsewhere, there has been some continuous rises. We're now starting to see some demand emerging as well. I think a key one for a lot of people in the trading arena is that the New South Wales Murray General Security has remained at 30% 30% availability, and that's despite Lake Hume getting to a pretty good volume and high volumes in the Menindee Lake system. Sorry, stumbling over my words this morning. Just a note on the Murray system allocation. There's been a bit of interest around this borrow from the Barmah-Millewa Forest environmental water allocation, summarised this morning. Now this, I have to say, is something that occurs in every year. So it's not anything unusual that we've done this year, but there is a slight difference to what's happened. So normally we borrow all the complete volume from the Barmah-Millewa Forest, which can be anywhere from about 100 megalitres up to 100 gigalitres up to 350 gigalitres. At the moment, because it hasn't been used for some time, just through the availability of some natural flows going through the Barmah-Millewa Forest, neither Victoria nor New South Wales have actually used some of that water, so it's reached its maximum volume of 350 gigalitres availability. This year, we've gone into the 5th year of a period since we've had continuous flows of at least 500 gigalitres per month between the months of September and November, and 400 gigalitres a month through December, downstream of the Yarrawonga Weir. And that triggers an arrangement whereby the Victoria Environmental Water Holder can work with Goulburn Murray Water as the resource manager, just about how the normal borrowing arrangements can be changed. So historically, and at any other time, we would be repaying in full the borrow from the BWA once we've reached 100% high reliability water shares in the Victorian Murray system. New South Wales has a different borrowing system. So this year, what the process will be is that we borrowed all our 10 gigalitres up front. From 50% high reliability water shares, we've started to repay that. Now, what that means is instead of being an approximately 15 gigalitres for every 1% of high reliability water share improvement, it's now going to be about 22. So we've got an additional 7 gigalitres to repay back with each percentage point change. So it's going to slow the Murray improvement by approximately 30%. As we move through the rest of the year. It is the same as what we had in 2016-17, which was the last time we were in this process. So it is something that a few people may have some concerns about, given that we're in a relatively wetter year, and as we'll see, the forecasts are showing some better sequences. We think it's a relatively small impact on the Murray system. So I just need to get my slide. There we go. So in terms of with the operations as well, we've got pretty limited trading opportunities at the moment, just with the Barmah Choke being closed. The Goulburn Murray, as you would have heard earlier this morning from Joe, I believe, is closed as well, just with a little bit of a tagged use. We now have around about 1.5 gigalitre that needs to be cleared as well. And the Murrumbidgee to Murray is closed as well. It will open, I think, when it gets to 10 or 15 gigalitres. Apologies, I can't remember exact details. So at the moment, a lot of people are relying on the allocation improvements, particularly in the Murray system, just seeing what's happening in that space. Just to give you an idea of what has happened over the last 12 months with some of the resource improvements that we've seen, and 2021 and the 21-22 season thus far have seen some good improvements to where we have been in recent times. So all of the main storages, sort of Dartmouth, Hume and Eildon, are looking far better than they were at this time last year, and that's a great situation to be in, and that's one that we're very happy with. On the Broken system, which has experienced its own problems over the last few seasons, the last two, it has had some good volumes available to it, and that's been reflected in seasonal determinations. Slightly disappointingly, the systems to our west, both the Campaspe and the Loddon system, are seeing some relatively slower improvements compared to the other resources, sort of from the Goulburn and through the northeast, and that's consistent with what we've seen over the last 20 or so years. That the systems, sort of the Loddon and the Campaspe, have taken time to improve, although they can improve very quickly if we do get wetter conditions. In terms of inflows, I'll quickly run through these slides, but in the 2020-21 water year, even though it was a wetter year in comparison with the previous seasons, we still didn't get 100% of average inflows over that period. And if you look at those western catchments again, Lake Eppalock only got 43% of its average, and Ken Curran 33% of its average for that 12-month sequence. Now, if we compare that with July, and I'm not expecting these figures to be maintained into August, unfortunately, but we certainly had a really good response in July, where a lot of our systems were showing that they were in excess of 100%. Goulburn, the flows into Goulburn Weir downstream of Lake Eildon were only at 100%. But seeing those numbers, the volumes, plus this chance of receiving greater inflows based on our long-term statistics, which have been adjusted for climate change in line with recommendations from the DELP. Though the smaller the number here in this column, greater the better off we are. So if we're closer towards a 1% or something like that, 1% is an incredibly wet sequence. But in the order of 10% or even 20%, it's looking like a good year. And when we look at what the climate trends are, that's being reinforced. So at the moment, a lot of the weather across northern Victoria is being driven by the negative Indian Ocean dipole off the northwest of Australia and across towards Africa. It's indicating a higher chance of above average rainfall. The Bureau tells us it will persist through spring. So if that's the case, according to long-term records, we should see some better rainfall, or at least average rainfall. Obviously, there's no guarantee that will happen, but the climate drivers are suggesting that it should. Similarly, in the Pacific Ocean, the El Nino Southern Oscillation details are suggesting that it is moving towards a La Nina threshold, which again reinforces the likelihood of getting above average rainfall. The climate models are suggesting that's going to be only held for a very short period and not really allow for a declaration of a La Nina event. but at the same time it is contributing to and reinforcing the impacts of the Indian Ocean dipole. The third one that gets a mention from time to time is the southern annular mode, which is set around the Antarctic and moves up and down and determines where fronts cross Victoria or Australia as a whole. At the moment, the Bureau is saying it's neutral, so little impact. Earlier in the season, it was suggesting that the way in which the annular mode was operating was seeing the fronts crossing a bit more across northern Victoria, which was contributing to some of that rainfall we saw through June and certainly into July. Now, one thing that the Bureau reinforces, and I would say from my experience as resources manager, is that we are seeing less rainfall occur during the cool season, which is really winter and spring, 10 to 20% less over recent decades. That's very consistent with what we've seen. So just bearing that in mind, even with these outlooks. In terms of what to expect for September, and I apologise for not focusing in on Victorian conditions. It's a little bit hard. The Bureau doesn't allow you to download good quality imagery at the moment for the states. But we are seeing, if you look at the green, sort of where the northern part of Victoria, that's showing still a good indication of above average rainfall or above median, which would hold up with good allocations for the rest of the season. Similarly, going a bit longer term into October, again, relatively good conditions, and from the consideration of our Murray system as well, we're still seeing some good likelihood of higher rainfall across the sort of central and western New South Wales, which will contribute to ongoing flows into the Menindee Lake system, which is something we haven't seen for quite some time, and that certainly helps with supply to South Australia and improving resource availability for Victoria and New South Wales, although not to a huge extent, but it does just provides a bit more flexibility for Murray-Darling Basin Authority operations. Looking through for the next 3 months, October through to December, we're still seeing a relatively dark green. Obviously, I want to see that come through to fruition, but time will tell what happens. There is a good rainfall event coming through Friday into Saturday. That should see some good runoff, I think. The catchments are still relatively productive, so stream flows are relatively strong at the moment. So it's just a matter of now waiting to see what happens. So if I was to wrap it up from those outlooks side of things, they're generally optimistic. We're currently sitting on the basis of what we've seen so far through July, and most likely with the impact of August as well, we'll be at average to above average rainfall forecast and impacts for stream flow. Sorry, that should actually say stream flow forecasts. Oops, sorry, went the wrong direction. Victoria and Murray, these are from mid-August, indicating for the Victoria and Murray that relatively optimistic outlook towards mid-February and getting to that 100% high reliability water shares. As I mentioned, slowed down a little bit by the repayment that is in place at the moment for the Barmer Millewa. But by mid-October, 70%, and I think people can plan for some good availability. A little bit more optimistic in the Goulburn system. These will be updated again mid this month. But by mid-October, we should be pretty close to 100% in the Goulburn system, which is a fantastic place to be after having some lower allocations only a couple of years ago. And if I was to wrap it up for some takeaway messages, catchments are wet. They're still holding up some good inflows. Together with a positive rainfall forecast, bearing in mind that there's still uncertainty around that and how that rain will fall. It's not a bad position to be in if I was a customer. I know, speaking to some farmers, they're hoping not to get too wet in the paddocks. So I'm really hoping for some of that rainfall to occur in the catchments, in the upper catchments, I should say, not so much in the lower catchments. But still to come, we are now starting to see some demand increasing. And hopefully this month, GMW in conjunction with MDBA and the department will begin releasing some water from the Goulburn IVT. Which will open up a little bit of trade into the Murray, and that's part of the operating plan that is currently being developed with those two other agencies. We're still experiencing what we're planning and getting ready to experience how that will work. It is new for us as well, but we'll be putting out information as best we can to go through that. So I will wrap it up at that point, and hopefully I've left some decent time for questions. And
thank you very much, Mark. Mark, if you could stop sharing your screen now, please. Thank you very much, Mark. That was fantastic. So we do have a few minutes here for questions for Mark. So please do put those in the chat function. This is a really great opportunity to draw upon the wisdom of someone who's a real expert in his field. Mark, I don't know if I could press you to say something about beyond 21-22. I don't know if that's the equivalent of reading tea leaves, but is there anything that you feel you could say about beyond 21-22?
Oh, beyond 21-22, I'd love to be able to give some longer term forecasts, and that is something that GMW is certainly putting its attention to in conjunction with some of our partners in the world of academia and research, and part of our longer term strategy with water resource management. But at this stage, it's a little bit difficult to provide an optimistic or even a pessimistic outlook at this stage, Chris, mainly because at the moment we haven't put away, or not being at 100%, we haven't started to set aside reserves for next year, apart from those from what we need to operate the GMID. So until we get to 100% and start securing some reserves, we would be at the point of we can operate the GMID next year. So that's a positive outlook for any of the irrigators who may have carryover that they'll take into next year. However, we won't have enough, won't have water to allocate at this point next year. Some of the work that we are looking at is potentially reviewing, or we will be reviewing, I should say, the amount of water that we do set aside for losses in the GMID. That's another outcome of the conclusion of the conclusion of that connections project, is what I was trying to say before my tongue tied itself in knots. And that's some work that we'll probably start in sort of in mid-22, 2022.
That's great, Mark. Now, this is a tricky question because I'm asking you to mark yourself. So mark generously, and that is, did you expect the 2021 inflows and current storage volumes if we'd been talking a year ago?
No. I must admit, I tend to look on the more conservative side of inflows. My experience has been in the last 15 years working in this role that, or related to this role, is that we've tended to see a year of recovery, storages rising up from the 30s and 20% that we have been seeing, but not going much further. So when we had the low allocations in 2019-20, where the Murray finished at 66% and the Goulburn system at 80%, and we had a very low allocation on the Broken system, only 2% I think it was. I wasn't expecting a recovery to get to 100% and certainly to get us to this point. Having said that, we welcome it. It does provide some certainty into next year, and with the catchment that we're seeing this year, it is on the optimistic side, but I'm still holding my cards close to my chest.
Fantastic. And Mark, when is the next allocation announcement?
Next allocation announcement will be, as I just checked my calendar, which I haven't updated, it will be on the 15th. I was just making sure that it wasn't well, I should know actually, I can count 14 days from today. So it will be Wednesday the 15th. We will also put out an updated risk of spill announcement on the 10th of September, so Friday the 10th.
Right. And Mark, what are some of the resources at the Goulburn Murray Water website if people are interested in this space? And also at the Northern Resource Manager website as well?
Yeah, it is a combination of 2 or 3 websites actually, Chris, that customers now tend to rely on. So nvrm.net.au, which is the Northern Victorian Resource Manager website, will provide information about where inflows are trending for the year. It also gives you a list of outlooks. So thank you, Chloe. The outlooks are more than what we just normally present in the media release that goes out. There's about 7 different ranges that are provided in terms of in terms of inflow conditions that we may be seeing through from very wet conditions through to extremely dry conditions. On the GMW website, there's information about what is actually being released from storage and for what purposes, particularly things such as IVT deliveries that may be occurring in the Goulburn system through to the Murray, and generally about how much will be released in a given month. So that gives people an indication of what's happening and what could be expected. Some more information that people can turn to can be obtained from the Victorian Water Register website, which is waterregister.vic.gov.au, for particular issues about, or not issues, but particular material about water shares, allocations and entitlements. The other, one that I would like to mention, and if I'd had a bit more time today, I would have touched on, is one of the tables or one of the pages on the NVRM website talks about the amount of water that is actually held privately by the environment or by the urban water corporations, and it gives an idea of just how much water is sitting in private accounts for people who are interested in what sort of availability is out there, and we have that by each of the systems, I should say, not just the major systems. So that's the two large systems, the Goulburn and Murray, and the four other water systems that are operated.
That's fantastic. And thank you very much, Chloe, for in real time updating us on those website links as Mark's been mentioning them. So I think that brings us to the end of Mark's session. That was fantastic, Mark, but stay right there. Don't leave the stage, because we're now moving into our general Q&A time. So we're going to have Mark, we're going to have Vanessa, Stuart, Fabian, join us as well, who presented with us earlier, and Alex from DELP will be joining us in just a few minutes. So this is just an opportunity that if there is something that we didn't cover earlier, you've got a question or a comment, this is the chance to deal to that now. You know, please noting that I'm not intending to stretch this session out. If we have questions, we have, and that's great, and we're really keen to answer them. But if we don't have questions, hopefully that's a sign that the presentations and the sessions so far have been informative. We've got Lisa with us as well, which is great. And so I'm just going to open it now for any questions or comments. As you know, if you could put it in the chat function, please. I was perhaps going to ask each of you just a general question to start off with, and that is, what is the most important or interesting thing that happened in your space in 2020-21? So kind of a sentence or less, and maybe I'll start with Mark. I know I'm picking on you, Mark.
Yeah, you are, Chris. Interesting things.
Or most important thing.
Most important thing is probably the implementation of the Goulburn to Murray trade rules, which are quite a sweeping change in terms of availability of trade and how customers will be working to that trade.
Right, and I'm working around my screen clockwise, which means Fabian, you're unfortunate to go next. What do you think is the most kind of interesting or important thing that has happened in your space in the last financial year?
Without a doubt, just shifting from my BAU role into the project space and getting these water entitlements on their way to customers.
Fantastic.
Easy
Again,
one.
I'm moving clockwise. That means you, Lisa.
For me, it's probably moving into this role as Fabian's moved into the project manager role, and a big achievement for our team in last financial year was supporting the Midiamo pipeline customer entitlements being issued and the finalisation of that project.
Great. Alex, thanks for joining us. I'm just asking each of our presenters just to start off with one question about what was the most important or interesting thing that happened in your space over 2020-21, so something in your workspace. I'll come back to you, Alex, so you've got some thinking time. Vanessa, how about you? Are you able to, you've had some connection issues, are you able to give us a response to that?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I think obviously the big piece of work that's happening in our space is the implementation of the penalty infringement notices and working with customers to understand their obligations there.
Great. Stuart, how about you?
A bit like Lisa and Fabian, I've moved into a new role, so that in itself is interesting. Also, what I've found interesting is I've continued having some responsibilities with working with Fabian and getting those water shares across to irrigators. That's it's been a very interesting process. And also, what I've found interesting is the recent court cases around non-compliance, particularly that large case in Mildura with Brownport, who were taken for some significant unauthorised use. I found all that process very interesting.
Yeah, thank you, Stuart. Alex, do you have anything just to start us off? One sentence or less, or a couple of sentences just on something important or interesting that's happened in your space?
Yeah, I think quite obviously the Goulburn Murray Trade Review and just getting what we think is a really good outcome for trying to balance those objectives in a really challenging space. And this interim year in place for 21-22, obviously a big piece of work, especially leading up to June 2021.
Great, thanks, Alex. Now I'm just going to go to the questions that we've got there in the chat function. So another great one from Karen Baker. So great presentation, thank you. Is there any chance in the future that small DNS holdings will remain linked to the land and transfer with land upon a sale, and the transfer register with a simple notice or form similar to the New South Wales system? At present, small residential holdings go through the same process that irrigation holders do. Not all conveyancers have the knowledge or experience to deal with Goulburn Murray water, and errors inevitably occur. So I'm wondering, is that one for you, Lisa?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that one. Thank you, Chris. So good question, Karen. Thank you. As the legislation stands at the moment, they do have to continue to go through the process that we have in place. We have implemented in the last few years the land and water transfer process. So that would be the process I would suggest small holdings and even large holdings use to try and streamline that change of ownership process as much as possible and try and avoid things being missed. But yeah, unfortunately, unless there's a change to legislation, they will have to continue to go through this process.
Thanks, Lisa. Now, the next one in our chat isn't so much a question as a comment, so it's a big thanks to Mark and his team who continue to provide excellent information and resources to the water market. Thanks, Ben Williams. But just a note, Ben Williams, I'm president of the Mark Bailey Fan Club, and if you want to join, there's a formal process. We'll send you the link to the website. But thank you very much for that comment. We have a comment from, and my apologies if I mispronounce this, Giannina DeAngelis. A great question. With regards to IVT, will the volume of trade from Zone 7 to Zone 1A be limited in any way other than the IVT? So is that a Mark Bailey question? Looks like it is.
Yep, I think so, Chris. Hi, Janina, how you going? That is one that it's limited in a couple of different ways. The other thing that we're looking at the moment is in terms of the amount that can trade and not cause a spill of Victorian resources. So historically, the amount of trade between New South Wales and Victoria has been determined by the risk of spill in Lake Hume. At the moment, as part of a trial, we're also including Dartmouth Reservoir within that. So the assessment is now being conducted in terms of the risk of spill from Dartmouth as well. It's a very low chance at the moment of having a spill, so we can maximise the amount that's trading. It's notionally 200 gigalitres. There has been a little bit of trade back in so far this year, so I'm sorry, I just can't remember the number off the top of my head. But we review that each month as part of the risk of spill assessments.
Fantastic, thank you, Mark. And Joe has just rejoined us, which is great. Joe, I did ask everyone else one general question before, and that was, what was the most interesting or important thing that had happened in your space over the last financial year, 2021?
Well, what else but the Goulburn Murray trade rule is one answer to that. Oh, look, sorry, outside of work. more time walking the dog and more time trying to stop the dog attack the door next to me while I'm in the middle of Teams meeting, annoying everyone. So I think a good theory probably is now.
I think the dog has a different opinion on that.
Yeah, exactly.
They always should get a rat.
So. Yeah. I was just, if I could, Chris, I'll just add to what Mark said to Janina's question. I think for trade, the question is about trade backup into Zone 1A, I would encourage people again to look at those tools on the register website for trade opportunity backup. There was late last year, I think a lot of people were looking at the balance of how much was owed from how much was available under the Goulburn to Murray trade rule, the forward trade rule, to try and deduce the opportunity, whereas the always correct answer you can simply get from the website by looking up the trade opportunities back into 1A. So just a simple reminder to people just to get used to looking at that. It's not something many people have had to do over many years because trade backup hasn't been restricted very often. So as always happens, when something hasn't happened for a long time, it catches people by surprise. But yeah, do just form the habit of checking there, I think.
Thank you very much, Joe. That was a really helpful addition. And we do have a comment from Giannina. It seems that the Mark Bailey fan club has just joined a new member. I don't know why we haven't been able to provide you with the website and the link, but we'll get that to you as soon as possible. And as I said, as I mentioned earlier, Mark is the subject of episode 1 of our water podcast, which is available at the website. I'll just wait for a moment. Here we go. This is another question from Liz Johnston. Thanks, you've been a great participant this morning, Liz. With the introduction of the charging for water share records, customers would like to be able to consolidate water shares. One thing that holds up consolidation is mortgage on the shares. Would VWR consider changing rules to allow water shares to consolidate if mortgage was the same on all water shares, in addition to other rules for consolidation? I'm glad I don't have to answer this question, but I think I saw Lisa's head nodding. Is this a Lisa question?
Yes, I'm happy to take that one. Thanks, Chris. Unfortunately, Liz, the requirement to have the mortgages discharged and all in line is actually a requirement under the Act and the trading rules. So it's not something we can change at our end. Happy to have the conversation with the water registrar, but it is an enforced rule within the system as well. So yeah, at this stage, that wouldn't be something that we're able to change.
And we've got another good one from Ben Williams. Thanks, Ben. A question to Joe. Are entitlement trades as part of a real estate transfer able to be noted as such on the register? Often these are outlier values and result in some confusion.
Thanks, Chris and Ben. Look, we don't at the moment. We have several ways we facilitate that. One of the ones I think Lisa probably referred to is effectively a consolidated land and water trade application that allows us to identify one way which people are selling land and water as a whole package. People aren't bound to use only that, so that's one of our limitations. We don't always know. It is something we can look at in the future, I suppose, looking at the quality of data that comes in from that. I think the other thing we'd say a bit blithely is we also still, I acknowledge there are some outliers there. We do expect people to, wherever possible, in line with expectations, make sure they do their best to put the true value on the water as well. So I think there's two issues there, Ben. There's making sure all the data we've got is as transparent as possible, but also continuing to reinforce those requirements, etc., to make sure people are putting the right values on things.
Thanks, and please let us know if we need to add to any of those responses or if we haven't answered your question. And I see that Chloe has put up the link to the podcast, which is great. It's growing Mark's fame. I know he now has problems with paparazzi on a day-to-day basis, so we all feel for you, Mark. Were there any other questions or comments? I'm glad Mark's on mute and I can't hear that. Do we have any comments or questions? As I said, I'm not intending to drag this out, and we've had some really good conversation. Oh, now here's a really good one that's come from Henry Harding. Thank you, Henry. In regards to decreasing trade times and increased efficiencies for Goulburn Murray Water and Lower Murray Water customers regarding allocation trades, the current broker common rules state that, and you can read there in the chat function what the rules say, having authorisations for vendors should be non-negotiable, but has there been any consideration to allow temporary purchasers to ABA accounts within the purchaser to sign 39AB if the purchaser were to provide authorisation for the lodging party to act on their behalf? That's another question where I'm really glad I'm the facilitator and not a presenter or answerer of the questions. And I'm looking around to see who's going to twitch first as an indicator that this is Mark saying not for him. Is this, Lisa, another one for you?
Did you want to take it, Joe?
I'll give it a go. I'm not sure I'm reading it correctly, Henry, so tell me if I get this wrong. I think this question is about when you're using the broker portal to submit allocation trades, when you need authorization from the buyer account. Our requirement under the common rules is you only need authorization from the buyer account when you are doing a feasibility check. And the reason we want authorization there is because that feasibility check, I guess, allows you to identify who the other holders of the account are and the account number. So that's the reason for that. You can do a trade without buyer authorization if you don't use the feasibility check functionality, because then you don't find out that information. Again, generally, we encourage people to use the feasibility check and to have that authorization because it gives them confidence before submitting the trade. So that's a bit of context. Again, I'm probably not answering it directly. I can have a bit more of a look at that offline. The other thing I think worth noting for the longer term, but not for the immediate, I guess, like many of our other aspirations to bring more stuff electronic and more stuff online in the long run, I think we would ultimately like to look at ways that down the track we can start to get some of those authorizations electronically, which I think would be a bigger improvement in, how usable those systems are.
Thank you so much, Joe. Henry, perhaps you can give us an indication of whether you think your question has been answered or not. And by all means, any follow-up question that you might have. Did anyone else on the panel want to talk about that question at all? So Ben Williams has added, Joe, I don't know if you can see it there, a suggested clarification about payment as implied authorization.
Yeah, I think, Chris, I might not answer this correctly, and Ben, part of the reason, again, we require it is different brokers will have different requirements. We don't know the arrangement for the vendor paying you, and also you can do a feasibility check without pushing through a trade. So that's part of why we want authorization from the buyer account when you do that feasibility check, because without it, I guess there's opportunity for just people to use the feasibility check to find out who holds accounts. So we want basically wherever an intermediary can either deal in trading water out of an account or using the broker portal to find out who the holders of an account are, potentially, that they have the right authorization from the customers.
Great, thank you.
So again, it does add a requirement, but I guess that's the flip side of the extra visibility we provide through the broker portal for people to validate that they're trading into the right accounts, etc. So, thanks, Chris. So.
And Joe, again, if you're following the chat, you can see that Henry's added an addition there. If I were to use the bank account as an example, I don't need to give permission for each transaction to receive funds into my account. Is there a way that we can do a feasibility check just for a vendor?
Yeah, I think that's probably something I have to take on notice, Henry. That's a bit of a business process and design question. But yeah, I can take that away and talk to some people and think about what that would mean in practice.
Great. I'll just pause for a moment to see if there are any More comments or questions? No, what I'll do then is if I can ask our presenters to just stay put there, and I'll move into a closeout. So firstly, I do want to thank everyone who's attended the session today. Really encouraged by the attendance we've had, really encouraged by the participation for each of the sessions. So thanks so much for coming along. I also want to thank each of the presenters again for their time. They're valued, skilled experts in their areas, and we really value the contribution you made today. I also want to give a really big thanks to the Goulburn Murray Water communications team who put this session together. I'm just a really bad layer of thin icing on a cake that was produced by Chloe Warburton, Claire Nile and Ali Fasciolo. So thanks to those three women who have just done a fantastic job in bringing all this together and certainly supporting me during this session. I do want to remind you to please give this session a quick rating in the chat function before you go, and all you need to do is just put a number between 1 and 5. So 1 is poor, 5 is excellent. However you want to rate us, just a number between 1 and 5. Again, 1 is poor, 5 is excellent. It's really important you do this because we'll certainly use your feedback to work out when and if we have one of these sessions again. We do want to have one of these sessions again, but certainly we'll listen to the feedback that we get from you. By all means, if you've got any follow-up or questions, we've got a communications@gmwater.com.au email address, so send any questions to communications@Goulburn Murray Water. And as I said, we will be sending out a summary of this event to everyone who registered. I also just wanted to let you know about some upcoming engagement events that Goulburn Murray Water is doing. So we are going to do an education webinar with the Victorian Environmental Water Holder. The date is still yet to be confirmed, but potentially that'll be in September. We also will be sending out a short pulse survey of our customers in October, which will be to get a sense of customer satisfaction with Goulburn Murray Water. We are doing a Women in Water series, which will be a series of webinars celebrating women in Goulburn Murray Water in the water industry. Again, dates to be confirmed. We're going to do a science, technology, engineering and mathematics event with La Trobe University, again, sometime in November. We will also be having an annual water forum, most likely in December, where we'll bring together customers and stakeholders to discuss the topics that impact you. So again, date to be confirmed, but most likely December. And I've already mentioned a few times our monthly podcast, which has just launched. And as you've heard a couple of times, Mark was the outstanding contributor to in the first episode. So I do want to bring things to a close. Thanks to those of you who are giving your feedback in the chat function, much appreciated. As I said, 1 didn't like it, 5 really liked it, and anything in between. Earlier on, we had Joe mentioning that the Paralympics are on at the moment, and I'm excited and proud of our Australian Paralympians who have a total medal tally of 54 and 13 gold medals. But I wanted, given that the Paralympics are on, I wanted to close with a quote from someone of disability, and that was Helen Keller. Some of you might be familiar with Helen Keller. She was a blind and deaf woman who lived at the end of the 19th century, start of the 20th century. To the extent we know her these days, she's often used as a punchline for comedians when they're making jokes about sensory deprivation. But Helen Keller's life was so much more important and so much more remarkable than that. You just think that she's a blind and deaf woman, yet she spent at least part of her life going around advocating for slum clearances. So not slum clearances for deaf and blind people, but for everyone. She'd get up on these stages and she'd use signing to have someone speak to her in front of an audience. She also wrote several books. She was also very famous for saying that anything that you could work out about the character of a person, you could do so just by feeling their hand. But I do want to end on a quote from Helen Keller, which is this: "Everything has its wonders, even darkness and silence, and I learn, whatever state I may be in, to be content." Thank you so much once again for attending the session today. And we'll see you at another Gold Murray Water event.